Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Hello, my friends. Today I want to talk about advocating effectively for the love, the connection, the support that you know deep in that big, beautiful heart of yours that's needed and is essential for you to be really deeply happy in your marriage. I want to talk about that because, as you may have heard and understood from listening to this podcast, or maybe you've read my emails, so many of us want that. We want that love and connection and support from our partner. We want to be seeing his showing up for us in a way that, we love that, right? We want him to show up for us in a way that feels really good to us, as well as show up for him, right? In those same sorts of ways. But we oftentimes maybe go about trying to have that happen in ways that don't work, that aren't very effective. When we communicate it, for example, it might not land well with him, or it might lead to more conflict and discord. And oftentimes this is what I see. We as women want that for ourselves and for our relationship, but we aren't effectively communicating or effectively interacting with him in a way that love and connection and support actually becomes the result, right? Or in a way that inspires him to be able to show up in those ways that you most want, right? And I think one of the big reasons is because it's actually quite tricky to powerfully advocate for that love and connection and respect in all the things that you're wanting in your marriage. It's tricky in our modern world. This modern world in which our men have been born and raised. And this would be true for all people, but this is especially true for those of you who have a partner who is a cis hetero male or was socialized as a male. Because I think of it as there has been a colonization of these men's mind, body, heart systems. And I would call this a patriarchal colonization. I mean, we all have patriarchal internal colonization, which, let me see if I can define that briefly, is like male dominant. We live in a culture that was developed from a very male-centric viewpoint, a very patriarchal viewpoint. And we just even if we just think back to white men in their white wigs, right? Really, I want to think about this as the patriarchy did not, these men, for example, let's say society developed from a very male-based lineage that was very non-accepting of so many things, of a lot of what we might call more feminine things, like feelings, for example. So without getting too deep into talking about the patriarchy, what my main point here is our men were taught that certain things were okay and certain things were not okay, as were we all, right? But men were socialized specifically to believe that certain things and certain ways of being were okay for them and certain ways of being were not okay for them. Whereas for women, certain things were more okay and other things were not okay, right? So men, in other words, have been this sort of societal shaping has become internalized for them. And so they have certain ways unconsciously certain things that they think are okay for them, certain ways of being that are okay for them, and certain ways of being that are not okay for them. And I want to be really clear that this, what I'm calling this patriarchal colonization of their mind, body, heart systems, of their beings, this was not something they asked for, right? They did not choose to internalize any of this on purpose, right? But as did none of us on purpose. It's just absorbed like by osmosis into us. Yeah. And so this is what I'm trying to get at here, is that because of this colonization, this socialization, we can put it simply like that, they can actually be very, very sensitive to the way you communicate, to the way we communicate what we want and what we do not want. Okay? This is so important to understand, because when we don't understand this, we run into a whole lot of non-receptiveness from his end, right? Has your husband ever gotten defensive when you've just made a simple request? Has your husband gone into kind of what I call justification or explaining mode? Like explaining why he was doing something when you just asked him simply to do something different than he was. Like, I don't know, like, could you put that pot in this side of the dishwasher instead of this side? And then he goes into this whole like, well, I did it because this and this and this. Has your husband ever snapped at you when you told him something like you wanted to go out with him more, or you wanted him to come to bed on at the same time you did? Has he ever snapped at you about something like that? Or have you ever gotten in a fight with him when you just wanted to express and feel like you were being heard, that something he was doing or something that he wasn't doing was leaving you feeling sad or upset or lonely? If you answered yes to any of these questions, this is a sign that he has some of this colonization, this socialization that makes him very sensitive to how you make requests or how you try to advocate for the love and connection and respect and support that you really want. All of these examples that I just laid up for you are like examples of maybe how he might react to your expressions, your communications with him. These are what I would call signs of his woundings. Signs of his little boy self having been what I would think of as indoctrinated into a society that required him to override so much of just his very basic humanness. Required him to override like just being a human being. These are signs of him growing up in a society that taught him he was only acceptable as a male if he suppresses his tender feelings, if he expresses no other emotion than anger, if any negative emotion at all, right? I mean, positive emotions are okay, some of them, right? Sadness, no. Vulnerability, no. Anger's okay, right? Right? A society that taught him that he should push away any sense of shame or hurt that he might feel. That it's not okay to reveal that you have any of that as a male. Which, of course, like those feelings are going to come up in him when you point out where he may be falling short, right? So he push it away, push it down, yeah? Until we all know that when we push down our feelings, they eventually explode or create all sorts of interesting reactive behaviors. And this same society taught him all sorts of other things, right? This colonization made him believe in some part of him that it was good to act competitively, dominating, like all-knowing. I hear a lot of my clients be like, oh, he's such a know-it-all, or he thinks he knows all the things, right? And in control, right? Like these are messages our men have picked up and internalized. And it's, as you can hear, it's like left them with a very narrow range of what's acceptable for them to show up as, for what they're allowed to express, for who they're allowed to be. And as you can guess, this is painful for them. The truth is, deep down, our men are in just as much pain as we are because of this colonization, this teaching that they've I wouldn't say imbibed, that they've the Kool-Aid that they've drunk. Yeah. It's painful to us because it's very challenging to be in relationship with someone who's defensive, who can't express a full range of emotions. It can be painful, right? Because it's like very opposite of what we want. Yeah, but it's also painful for him because he doesn't get to be a full human. He needs to squash himself. He needs to fit these roles. He doesn't get to be a full spectrum human. And he ends up with a lot of shame if he veers out of this very narrow bandwidth that he's allowed to exist in. And he ends up very confused too, because he does have other feelings. Like, what are you supposed to do with those if you're not allowed to have them? Yeah? If you're curious about this, learning more about this, a really great episode would be episode 8 of my podcast with Casey Desharnais. We did this beautiful interview about this, and he's a male, he's a coach for men, and so he gets to work really deeply, intimately with men, and of course, he shares his own experience as well. So it's a really beautiful insight into what some of our men are struggling with. So I highly recommend going back and listening to that. But they are in pain about this. But most of them aren't even aware. I mean, many men aren't even aware of this colonization, this socialization, right? Because again, they're like fish swimming in water. It's really all they've ever known. It's all they know. They can't see anything else. They can't even see that they're in it. It just is. Right? It's like us breathing air. We don't know we're breathing air until someone told us, oh, that's air. That's oxygen. Right? So for them, they might not be aware that this is going on, but they do experience the pain, the disconnection, like the loss of sense of self, and then the reactivity that comes from it. And really, it probably deep down, like not feeling aligned with something, feeling that something is missing in them, in their experience, because it is. Right? In some ways, they are cut off from the love, the connection, the juiciness, the intimacy that all humans really want, not just female humans. And they're not able to be, ultimately, at least at this moment, maybe, exactly who you want them to be. They're not always able to show up with all that respect and support and ability to connect that you really want. And actually, most likely, deep down, they really want to. Especially when we're communicating in certain ways that are triggering the pain and the shame and the like triggering that colonization. So it starts to play out, triggering that socialization. So one of the big questions is, how do we communicate in a way that actually touches their humanity, opens up their hearts, and actually has them hearing us and ultimately being who they really want to be in their hearts, who they want to be with us, the women that they love. Yeah? How do we actually communicate in that way? This is such a beautiful question, right? How can we show up with them in a way that actually opens their hearts, right? And allows them to be who they want to be with us. I know I just repeated the question, but I just think it's such a fascinating, beautiful question. So I want to offer you 3 keys today. The first key is, this may not sound unfamiliar if you have been listening to the podcast lately, because I've been talking about it a bit. The first key is do your own work on handling and expressing and feeling and making peace with the full range of your own human emotions. In other words, develop that emotional agency. Become more emotionally sovereign. Become really skillful with your own emotions. And do not try to skip this step. Like I talked about in very recent episode about loving interdependence versus emotional dependence. This is a great episode. Actually, I'd highly recommend, if you didn't listen to that after you listen to this one, because that's what this first step is about. So key, right? When you skip this step, which most of us do, as I talk about in that episode, it really backfires in our relationships and does not get us closer to that relationship that we really want with our partner in our heart of hearts, right? So this also includes like doing your work on your own emotions, doing your own work on how you think about also how your partner reacts to you. I see so many women, so many of my clients really struggling with how their partner is interacting or reacting to them. Like a lot of the times, my clients' partners are really decent human beings. They're good men, but they have reaction. They react in interesting ways, or they don't act in certain loving ways. And a lot of my clients, which is natural, right, have a really hard time with that. And then they react to it. But I noticed that a lot of the way we as women tend to think about our man's reactions and interactions with us is kind of like, oh, he's bad, he's doing it wrong, like is very judgmental and very misinformed, or just without awareness, without consciousness of what this other person might be struggling with and what might be really going on below his behaviors. And it creates a lot of pain for you and in the relationship. So to be brief, handling your own emotions includes doing your own work on how you relate to how your man interacts and reacts to you. All right, second key to communicating in a way that ultimately will help him be really who he wants to be with you. And that will lead to more authentic, genuine connection. This key is, I'm just going to call it, learn how to communicate in 4 key ways. So if you notice, the first key was actually about more like how you relate to your own feelings and how you think about and relate to his behaviors, right? So that was more of an internal bit of work, right? But now this is about how you actually, the states from which you communicate to him and the ways in which you actually do it, okay? So, and I'm going to break these down into 4 areas, 4 ways, and I'll just use the like lettering A, B, C, D for these 4 different ways, okay? So learn how to communicate from a baseline of love. And this is just like being connected to the fact that you love him and letting your intention in your communications be for love, for the love you have together, for the love of him, for the love of you and the relationship. Yeah. So it's like grounding in this baseline state of love, which I want to be super clear doesn't mean you have to be sweet, right? Love doesn't necessarily equal sweet and nice and always sweet. Couldn't think of another word there. Okay. But be in that baseline of love, or connect to that. Let that be the baseline. B, communicate from both the softness and the openness of vulnerability. So vulnerability is, without going into depth on this right now, vulnerability is kind of like, in a simple way of saying it, it's like being really connected with what's going on for you and being really open with it. And I want to say soft because it's not a defended place, right? It's a very soft and open place. And this is why we call it vulnerable. It almost feels a little raw sometimes, right? But it's very much like, this is the truth of what's here for me, without like making it like without any blame, right? Without turning anything towards anyone else. But it's really just this soft openness and transparency of what's there for you. Yeah? Okay. C, communicate from the indefensible against power of self-ownership. So this means there's no trace of blame. So kind of similar to B, right? To vulnerability. But self-ownership, yeah, it's almost like an extension of that. And it comes from a very clear awareness of how you are responsible for your experience, your reaction, what's going on for you. You're never responsible for the circumstance. Like, you're never responsible for what he says or how he behaves, but you are responsible for how it lands in you and how it affects you. So when we can communicate from that place of self-ownership with no trace of blame, it's an incredibly powerful way to communicate and get through to someone who has a tendency to be defensive or react to any trace of criticism or blame, right? Who gets triggered so easily by words you say. Oftentimes when you are communicating and he is getting defensive or reactive to you, it's because it's missing the self-ownership, the way you're communicating, right? And it's also missing that vulnerability and that love. Like, it may be missing one or all of those, right? So when we add those back in, changes the way he's able to hear you and communicate with you. All right, so the last piece here, D, letter D, we'd maybe just say the fourth way of communicating that is effective over time, is a subtle one. So I want to say this with like caveats. Right? Sometimes when these other approaches have not been successful, when you're trying to advocate for something that's so important to you in your relationship, sometimes we do want to communicate from the fierceness of love that sometimes sounds like anger. Right? So again, love doesn't always have to be sweet. It can sometimes feel ferocious, powerful, strong, right? Think of a mama bear who's roaring at a predator, might sound, right? She's got love for her baby. She's doing it from this loving place, but it's fierce. Yeah. Or maybe she's roaring at her babies. That might be a better metaphor here, actually, right? She's roaring at her babies because they're about to go into the road where there's a car coming. And maybe a bear doesn't actually do that, but you get the idea, right? My point is that we can use anger in a way that's powerful and effective, right? But there is skill involved here, and this is so key. Anger can be so counterproductive with your partner if it's expressed unskillfully. And this is where I see a lot of hard stuff going on for couples, right? Because there's anger, but it's not being channeled and it's not being channeled well internally. And then of course it's not then being used effectively in communication. So I want to be clear, like there's it's super important to get that there's a really important distinction between communicating from blame, like victimhood, and a place of demand, which is a way anger can express itself, versus from a place of being vulnerable, honest, and, courageous, and from a place of ownership, right? We can, and love, right? That's also, we can kind of be vulnerable even when we're feeling anger. I know that almost sounds like that's not like a paradox. It's a paradox, not a contradiction, right? Like we can be open and honest that we're angry about something without being blaming. So that can actually feel kind of vulnerable. So anyway, I could go on about this, but my point is, communicating from that place of vulnerability and fierce love, which might sound kind of like there might be some anger there. That's going to be effective in certain cases. Whereas if you're just communicating from like anger, blame, victimhood, and demand, that will just embroil you and he into more power struggles, right? And leave you feeling unseen and uncared for. And really like what you want, your wants and needs in the relationship aren't important. Because he's not going to be able to, he's just going to go into the defensive mode and the shutdown mode and everything we've talked about. So he's not going to be able to really hear you and respond or even want to be there from that place in him, from that reactive place in him. So I hope that's making sense. Kind of as a side note, I do want to say like conflict, even conflict can be gracefully navigated and lovingly resolved with him when you communicate in these ways, right? If you do have something that you are in conflict in or over, you have disagreement about, like these 4 ways that I've just mentioned, communicating from these places can really help conflict go smoothly and resolve them, even in ways that bring you ultimately closer to each other. My clients and my own experiences have been very much that. Like conflict doesn't have to push you apart. It can actually bring you closer when you are using these methods, when you are in these states of being, when you're communicating in these ways. I do plan to share a conflict episode or 2 with you in the coming weeks, so tune in for that for sure. All right, so the third key way that really leads to effective communication and like him not being in his defensive mode, what I've been calling like allowing him to be who he really wants to be, like in his heart with you. Yeah. This third way or third key to doing that is kind of what we've been talking about all along here. But I'm going to put it really clearly, hopefully for you. Learn how to love unconditionally without restriction, so that you can be in response to and hold space for the fact that he's struggling with all of this wounding and this conditioning. The fact that such painful conditioning might come up even when you speak in the kindest ways. The fact that he is unskillful right now in the ways you most want him to be skillful, because he was cut off from his humanity, not allowed to be a full human with all the feelings, because he was cut off from from his sense of worthiness in himself, unless he follows these conditioned ideas of who he should be, this colonization, this socialization, right? And because of that, he hurts. And he reacts and he protects. So he defends and he explains and he doesn't hear you. Yeah. And he's not had great guidance. He has not had great guidance on how to heal from all of that and move beyond that and be in his heart fully and live and love as a full spectrum human. We want to be able to love our men with all of that, our men with all of that, because it is what so many men are dealing with right now. And we want to be able to be in response to and have awareness. That's what I mean by hold space. Have awareness and have some understanding, and that might even mean compassion as well. That all of this is what's going on. That this on some level for your man is there. Now, there are men who have grown and evolved or just been very lucky to be raised by people who are heart-centered, who are able to teach him to be connected to his full humanity and feel that worthiness and feel peace with who he is truly as a human being and not just as a quote-unquote man who you're supposed to be as a man, right? But most men were not so lucky. Most men did not have that and have not had the guidance. So learn how to not necessarily be like, woohoo, it's awesome that you have all this going on. That is totally not what I'm saying. So it's not like, let's approve of it, but let's accept that and love him unconditionally with all of that and be in response to it, right? Be able to respond to it instead of just be mad and react against it all the time. Which is what I think women, we as women unconsciously do because we expect him to not have this. But it's not realistic to expect that he doesn't have this because this is the reality of the world we live in and what's gone on for our men. What is true for them. And one thing that I feel like I want to say here is, yes, we don't have to like it. And actually we might. I think it's appropriate to feel sad about it, but not to be mad at him about it, right? We can still love him unconditionally with this. And if you're like, why does she keep saying love unconditionally? I want to point you to an episode where I describe what that actually means and why we want that, not just for him, but for ourselves. And that is making a habit of love without conditions. It's episode 79. All right. So these are the 3 keys. And just to review, 1, do your own work on handling and relating to your own feelings and making peace with your own full range of emotions and even those ones that come up, and especially those ones that come up around how he behaves and is with you. Number 2, learn how to communicate in 4 key ways, from a baseline of love, from softness of vulnerability, from self-ownership, and only when those things aren't really working, from skillful anger and that mama bear, fierce love. When we can do these 3 things, when we can communicate and interact with him from this place, these places, we make it so much more possible for him to be able to feel safe enough, understood enough, and accepted enough to finally trust that he can be calm and take in your words without defensiveness, that he's loved and respected, even if you didn't like something he did, that he can be open to learning to do things in a way that work better for you, with no sense of shame or being wrong, or that you feel like he's wrong and bad, which will make, just trigger that wound, right? He'll finally be able to trust that his feelings are allowed to exist, all of them. And they're a sacred part of his humanness, that they actually belong here in this life. As he begins to trust this and feel safe enough and understood enough and accepted enough for all of this to happen, I do want to be clear, this doesn't mean he's going to be an instant wizard of emotional connection and attentive, loving support, but he's likely to be so much more open and have so much more natural capacity for growth and love and connection with you. So much more safety and even self-worth And I keep mentioning that because self-worth is one of the key things that allows us to not be defensive, to not be reactive, to be loving, to share our emotions with others. All of this, right? That's a lot of what you'd love from him in your marriage. That allows us to hear and listen to the other person, to our partner, with softness, with love, right? So when he's able to do this and you're able to do this too, this is when your marriage becomes a sanctuary of connection and nurturance and love and even lightness, because there's so much trust and safety and all the good things, right? This is where when your marriage starts to feel like you're evolving together in the best of ways. So I hope that this little breakdown of these key ways of being and relating to him so that he can ultimately evolve into someone who is able to be more of that loving, supportive husband you so want him to be, you so desire in your life. I hope this breakdown has been helpful for you. But if you're ready for all of this to really come alive in your husband and in your own self and in your marriage, join me in Treasured, my small group program. We'll be diving deep into the how-tos of communication and also the foundations of it, right? Which really are the emotional states we need to be in for this kind of connection, for this to happen, for this most effective communication. These emotional states and learning how to stay there and guide yourself there. That is the true work of great communication that resolves conflict, that allows it to be navigated in ways that actually create more closeness and that ultimately get you what you most desire in your marriage. So in Treasured, we are going to be doing this work deeply. Everything I've mentioned in this podcast today, that's some of the work we'll be doing there. And if you're curious, like, well, how, right? Like how, like that sounds amazing, but like, how are we actually going to do that work? Like, what do I actually get to help me do that? I'll share just a little bit of that right now. Of course, we'll do this work in our coaching calls where you have time to bring things that are going on for you and we'll coach on it. Other people will bring what's going on for them and we'll coach on it, and you'll just start really growing and evolving from that. You'll also get lifelong access to the 4 pillars of an amazing marriage learning site, which is full of all the things, so much powerful learning and guides and audios and videos and all the things. So you get lifelong access to that, as well as directions on how to work through that to make the most of it. And we'll be working together through it as a group. So it's going to be so good. And we're going to also have communication skills labs to develop the most effective communication skills. And of course, all of this you'll bring out into your own real life marriage, right? Where you will be practicing and implementing in real time, right? All of this and growing from all of this. You'll also receive the sensitive communication skills and conflict solutions for sensitive couples booklet and the sensitive connection booklet and a whole lot more. In fact, there's way more than you even need to make your marriage the loving, supportive, light, connected one you really want. So you can learn all about Treasured and everything that you get when you join, and really get a sense of what it will do for you and whether it's right for you or not by going to the description page, which I am putting a link to in the show notes here. So you can just click that direct link, or you can find it at my website, which is www.lifeisworthloving.com. And there'll be a tab right in the main menu that says Coach with Me, Treasured. Click that and you'll be able to learn all of that and join from there. We are enrolling now and it's on a first come, first served basis. So don't wait to check it out and fill out the join form, because I would love to have you there. And I know you will be so grateful to yourself for having made this choice to be part of this and change your marriage forever in ways that you are just so happy about and thrilled with. All right, my friends, be oh so well.